Illinois faces some big challenges. Today, we're about to hear a truly honest analysis of the problems we face. Equally as important, you'll also hear an in-depth discussion of some practical solutions. This is your radio source for stories, the insight, and the answers you won't hear anywhere else. Not in the media and not coming from Springfield. You're listening to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute. Now, here's your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Welcome back to Illinois Rising. I'm Pat Hughes of the Illinois Opportunity Project. Joining me today is Austin Berg. Austin is a writer at the Illinois Policy Institute and a columnist for the Illinois News Network. Austin, the legislators in Springfield and then the governor passed what is being termed a stopgap budget, which is not the full budget that everybody's been, thinking about and arguing about over all this time. But they did pass a budget that's going to last another 6 months. Some highlights from that budget. It gives the city of Chicago, which has not been popular in the rest of the state, the ability to raise property taxes by another $250 million. And to do what? To fund teacher pensions. And it'll cover $215 million of those pensions in 2017. But the package does not provide full bailout that the city officials initially thought and sought that they could get. And it does ensure some funding for some critical human services, road construction, prison operations, etc. This is not the full budget. This is not the ultimate answer. It's something I think the folks in Springfield and the governor felt they needed to do. What are your thoughts?
So I think this budget does three things. It's a bit like kissing your sister. It's not the long-term solution, and Rauner has said that correctly. The first thing is that it's not the $7 billion out of balanced budget that Madigan tried to shove through the legislature at the 11th hour. It's not that. It also doesn't provide the massive bailout to CPS that was being discussed. That's number two. And then number three, it opens the door for a lot of, we'll say, transformative reforms at the tail end of the year and looking into early 2017. And I think that's the most interesting part about this. Yeah,
I agree with you. I think really what this says is it's a signal to what's going to happen over the next 6 months and what structural reforms. The governor has been seeking specific structural reforms on property tax reform, on workers' compensation reform, on pension reform, to make our state more attractive to people and businesses. And, up until this point, he hasn't been able to get any traction with the entrenched Democrats and Mike Madigan on those fronts. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next 6 months. Obviously, we have an election during that time. My view of it is it's going to take different legislators in different seats of the House in order for that to happen, and perhaps in the Senate as well, so that the governor can seek some of these reforms. And it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen between now and November until something like that can happen. Luckily for us, we have someone who does this every day joining us on the program. He's a state representative and a friend of the program, a friend of mine, a friend of Dan Proft's, Representative Randy Freese. He's a Republican representative from Paloma, and he's joining us on the show today to talk about the stopgap budget and sort of what the next 6 months portend in the legislature and generally for the state of Illinois. Randy, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, great to be with you. Thanks for having me today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about how the stopgap budget came to be, sort of what you experienced during that time, and then we'll get to what we think the next 6 months holds.
Yes, the stopgap budget was actually a budget that was initially introduced at the end of the session period in May by our leader Durkin and several others who have been working on it. And it was, again, just that, a stopgap measure in case the working groups couldn't come through and deliver a complete comprehensive budget, as you were just alluding to earlier. Since we didn't have the comprehensive budget, there was a minimum amount that we needed to get done in order to relieve a lot of pressures. A lot of pressures for making sure schools opened on time in the fall, making sure that universities had the funding to at least operate and open and operate through the first semester, and that those students going to the university knew that they had the funding in place to be there as well. So we relieved a lot of those pains, as well as some of the things you mentioned, the human services and some other areas where the state has dropped the ball in the past, and we maybe continue to drop the ball since we don't have a comprehensive budget. But it again, a stopgap measure gets us through till January 2.
Representative Freese, this is Austin here. I was wondering, are you confident in what's going to happen in the next 6 months? Are you optimistic? And if so, what's the source of that optimism? I think a lot of people are confused about what this means for them.
Exactly. I tend to be an optimistic person, so I guess the answer to that is I am always optimistic. However, there's plenty to be pessimistic about. I don't know how we're going to negotiate come November, December for a comprehensive budget when it looks like there's going to be a demand or at least an ask for a substantial tax increase. And I've never been a proponent of that. Nations don't tax themselves into prosperity. The state of Illinois will not tax itself into any kind of prosperity. We need to have the reforms that you were also talking about earlier that the governor has espoused ever since he's been campaigning for the job. So we need to get busy with actually sitting down at the table and actually getting to discuss those reforms and get them in bill form to come to us for a vote.
Hey, Randy, it's Pat again. What are the electoral prospects in November, given what you just said with respect to Governor Rauner? Obviously, Governor Rauner won over Pat Quinn by 5 points, touting the same reforms he's trying to get passed through the General Assembly, and he's not able to do it because of the obstreperous nature of Mike Madigan and his caucus. And, of course, John Cullerton is no friend to the governor on these, but a little bit better than Madigan. The folks wanted these reforms, at least that's what they said when they voted Governor Rauner into office. Now there are a bunch of state legislative races that are taking place this November, a bunch of tight races where the Democrats won barely in districts where Governor Rauner won handily. What's your view of the electoral landscape, number one? And then number two, is that the only way, by changing the nature of the caucus, breaking a little bit of Madigan's power, getting him out of the supermajority, that we can potentially get the balanced budget that we need and the structural reforms that we need to get this state going?
Yeah, I won't say that that's the only way, but that would surely be a good way and a good first step is to change the balance of the power. There's basically been a one-party control since 2002. And right now, we're still seeing that a bit of an imbalance, and maybe because of that, trustworthiness between the two maybe has not grown and developed the way you would like to see it. So, as for how the elections are going to go, you've heard the term so many times. Probably, I don't have the crystal ball. I don't know. I can't read the electorate to tell you how it's going to turn out come November. But we're going to run some competitive races in some areas where maybe we haven't won in the past, and perhaps we can, from the Republicans' perspective, we can pull out some victories and perhaps get it away from the supermajority control of the Democrats in the House of Representatives.
Yeah, and if we're not able to do that, I think we're going to be able to do that. I, as you know, spend a lot of time in my private life on sort of that election stuff. But
yes.
If we're not able to do that, what are the reforms that maybe current Democrats are more attracted to that the governor's proposing versus others? Is there anything that there's common ground on in the governor's turnaround agenda that we think we can get through?
Well, as you mentioned, there's pension reform that needs to happen, and there's money on the table. There's as they say, skin in the game with this stopgap measure. Something needs to be done with pension reforms. I can talk to you all day about whether or not Illinois has probably not met its responsibility in making those pension payments in the past, delaying them, non-payments to pension programs. It's got us in arrears. But wherever we've done in the past, where we find ourselves currently is in a very, very bad situation. There's no way we're going to find ourselves favorable in the bond market with the continued problem that we have with our pensions and the amount of the billions of dollars that we're in arrears for that. So we've got to get that straightened out. There has to be reform there. I think that we will come to the table on that. I think the two other things that the governor has pointed out is property taxes and workers' comp reform. So I think there's continued work we can do in both of those measures. Again, the governor's pointed out that businesses not only don't want to come to Illinois because of those two things, but we're driving businesses currently that are here out of Illinois because of those two particular reforms that we need, workers' comp and the property tax.
Well, great. Randy, I appreciate your insights today. Thank you for joining us today on Illinois Rising. We'll look forward to what's going to happen over the next 6 months and to the reforms that we hope will help change the nature of the state. Representative Randy Freese, thank you so much.
Yep, thank you for having me. I hope we can make it happen.
Austin, just following up really quick, we got about 40 seconds. What are your thoughts on what the representative said, and where do you think this might be able to go?
Well, I think he's absolutely right to focus on those three reforms. Those are three big pain points within Illinois, especially the property tax issue, which we'll soon talk about. I think it's very interesting what we're going to see at the end of this year, looking into early next year, what Democrats are going to be willing to come to the table on, and hopefully this stopgap has given them the cover that they need to actually take some action on these big issues.